So sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. So again, this is Bobby Joe, Governor Little's Intergovernmental Affairs Director. So my role during COVID-19 has been a lot of communication with mayors and county commissioners, legislators, federal delegation, working a lot on the economic recovery plan with the governor, as I also do his economy, commerce, labor issues for him. So kind of dealing with COVID in a lot of different realms.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Representative Young, for setting this up. We appreciate the opportunity. This is Alex Adams. I'm the administrator of the Division of Financial Management for Governor Little, which is a fancy way of saying I run the budget shop. So I work with Governor Little to ensure the state meets its constitutional obligation of a balanced budget. And I'm sure we'll talk quite a bit tonight about the economic impact that COVID is having on the state's budget and some of the ways that the governor intends to navigate through that. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And Sam?
Hey, everybody, this is Sam Eaton. I'm the Governor's Director of Policy as well as Legal Counsel. So pre-COVID, I did a lot of different things. Obviously, a lot of the policy issues that the governor dealt with, I worked on. My background is in natural resources, so I focus on a lot of those issues. Now, during the COVID stuff, I spend most of my time doing a lot of legal review and working with the agencies that are dealing with their issues and trying to keep some of the other non-COVID issues on track. But it seems like most of my time spent on COVID, like everybody else. So every day is different.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bobby Joe and Alex and Sam. We just really appreciate you being here. Maybe just a couple quick things as we go forward. I have a list of questions here that have already been submitted. So we'll start with those. If you have additional questions as we go along, if you want to just type them in the chat bar and we'll add them to the list. And if we get to the end and we have some extra time, then we'll just take some open questions. So starting out, I wondered, between the three of you, can you give us an overview of the governor's plan to reopen business and resume our normal activities in the state?
Yeah, Representative. So we're going to turn this one over to Sam to provide an answer on that one.
Yeah. So I think most of you are aware of a few days ago, the guidelines for opening up Idaho. You know, I think the governor prides himself on being one of the first governors to come out with such a detailed plan for reopening. I mean, Idaho was near one of the last states that actually had a confirmed case. So we were on, you know, fortunately on the tail end of confirmed cases, and I think we're doing the best we can to be on the front end compared to most cases of reopening Idaho. So if you guys want information, you probably maybe you've already looked, but we have a new website dedicated to this staged reopening. It's rebound.idaho.gov. Obviously, we're shifting the focus. The original focus was, you know, responding to the pandemic and the concerns and trying not to overwhelm hospital capacity and our healthcare capacity that exists, so that we had enough capacity in case there was a huge spike. And we've done a good job of flattening the curve, which I think everybody's probably sick of almost hearing that by now. We're shifting now to pretty much, we're trying to open up as much as we can, with a few exceptions that the governor's been working on with the epidemiologists and other healthcare experts, focusing on the businesses in this first stage that are most conducive for social distancing and not spreading the virus. Obviously, the question we get is, well, you open up churches and, you know, the governor, and he appreciates the feedback, and a lot of people were concerned about, the freedom religion issues, and, obviously we took steps we thought were necessary to protect public health, but we all very much enjoy and participate in worship, and that was one of the first things that he was focused on doing in a way that was also conducive for public health. So, encouraging that when people are going back in this first stage, going back to church, that they comply with strict social distancing guidelines and do the best they can to avoid touching. And there's probably going to be some change. Church isn't going to be the same maybe as it used to be, but that was an important component for the governor to get back into place. And then obviously there's a lot of retail businesses that may or may not have been open doing curbside that are now during stage 1 on May 1 can fully open. But for now, restaurants, bars, large venues, gyms, and some of these other places remain closed. And, that's not a decision that the governor made lightly, but that was based on the feedback that he received from the healthcare experts on, what are some of these businesses that are more likely to be conducive to spread. And also this was all based on a staged approach, so that, if we do see a spike that, if we were to open up all at once, like people have seen in Georgia, and there's a huge spike, which we hope doesn't happen, but if that did happen, then we'd have to go all the way back to square one, where there's a phased approach. If we get through phase 1, okay, then we'll go to phase 2, okay. And then if we see a surge, we can either pause, or we only have to go back a stage. We don't have to close everything down again, because we don't know what caused the spike. So I know that gives a lot of people concern. Why aren't we just opening now? But there is some method to the madness, that if we open in stages, we can do so methodically and strategically, and hopefully do it in a way that there is no surge and that we have no healthcare capacity issues. So that was a lot, and I was kind of all over the place, but hopefully that helps answer that question.
And Representative Young, just one thing to add to that, we came out with guidance today for churches, daycares,
and youth activities. So that's all been updated to the Rebound website. So there's some good clarity just on best practices and guidelines for those little areas to follow.
So just to be clear, stage 1 now allows churches, daycares, and youth activities, and those are the new things.
And that also, Representative Young, that also going into stage 1, which is May 1, that's all retail as well. So I think it's something like over 80% of businesses will have the opportunity to be open May 1.
Okay, with the exception of restaurants, bars, gyms, large venues. What about some of the other things that we've talked about, like beauty salons and things like that?
Yeah, no, those are
Stage 2.
Those are in stage 2,
Okay.
which is May 16th, I believe.
Yep.
Okay, going to give us just kind of a broad overview of phase 2 then?
Sure. So this is Sam. So, and something I should have mentioned too is, I think most of you heard now about this virus, that there's a 14-day incubation period where you may be asymptomatic but are a carrier of the virus. And so across the board, everybody that's doing this through a phased approach is doing it in 2-week increments to see how whatever it is that we do, how the virus responds. And so we've given ourselves 2 weeks in between these stages to see what happens, because 5 days might go by and we don't see any sort of meaningful change. That wouldn't be abnormal, because it can take that long for us to see any sort of response. But within 14 days, we're pretty confident that we'll see if there's a response or not. So in stage 2, which would start May 16, if all goes well, bars and nightclubs would remain closed in that stage. Restaurant dining rooms would be able to open. We're actually just got a draft a couple hours ago of some guidance that we're going to try to get out in the next day or two for restaurants that are planning to open in stage 2. Obviously trying to space out patrons and new protocols for employees. And, these aren't going to be requirements that, we're not going to necessarily mandate that the restaurants do or that all these businesses do these things, but these are just best practices that we're encouraging the businesses to implement. And then so also in stage 2, indoor gyms and recreation facilities can open. Those personal care businesses can open, like massage, nail, hair. And then large venues like movie theaters, large sporting events, and those things will remain closed in stage 2. So stage 2 is the things that are opening in stage 2 are restaurant dining rooms, indoor gyms and recreational facilities, and then the personal care services.
Well, that's good. I'm going to need a haircut by May 16th. So could you define for us large events?
So it's not defined precisely. When we put together large venues, think like we've gotten a lot of questions about rodeos, I can tell you that. And so I think, a small rodeo with 10 to 50, a high school rodeo in stage, later on in the stage 4 would be okay. Stage 3, stage 4 would be okay. When you start talking hundreds or thousands, that's going to be more towards the end, towards stage 4. But large venues would be like concerts, large sport, like, think BSU games, ISU games, U of I games, other large sporting events, anything where there's mass gatherings of crowds, of people getting together.
Is there a definition of a mass gathering, like numbers of people or something that people can look to kind of know what you're talking about?
No, I mean, that's a good question. And we wanted to build in some flexibility again. I know it's not easy, and I always, I guess, as the attorney, push for definitions because it's easier, but also we kind of methodically did not put a definition in large venues because depending on how it goes, we wanted to be able to have some flexibility. I mean, generally our guidance goes to about 50 people. So, I mean, this isn't a hard and fast definition, but over 50 people, in close proximity would be probably considered large. But when you start thinking about other contexts like theme parks and sporting venues, you talk about the thousands because you could use the example of, one of the university stadiums that holds 10,000 people. If you had 1,000 people in there that were social distancing, that would be a large gathering, but considering the circumstances, would probably be okay. So it's not so much the number, it's usually more related to the facility and what the event is, if it's, if people are able to social distance or not. So that's kind of why we left that somewhat undefined so that we could work through those details and kind of maybe do more of a case-by-case analysis.
Great, that sounds good. It sounds like Representative Ehart has a question on stage 2.
If I can remember my question here, first one, guys, is, when it comes to stage 2, and so many of us fall, well, maybe not so many of us, but we feel like a lot of us fall in that category, and we are advertising. That's going to be a little bit difficult. So as we talk about being able to move from stage 1 to stage 2, and I think I understand what you've defined, if all of a sudden there's spikes, I suppose in deaths, because the death number it's a fascinating number. We have 54, 56 people who have died, which of course all deaths, let us just all acknowledge all deaths are not a good thing, but they're all older, with most having underlying circumstances. And so what would it take to keep us again from, because we're going to spend a lot of money that hasn't been coming in to advertise the fact that we're going to open, and not opening early. I believe, when I say early, the thought was possibly on the 1st. So what would, that would be devastating, a double whammy to our business where you're not receiving money, then you're spending money for money that won't come in because you can't open. What would keep us from opening then on the 16th as far as gyms? It would be a spike in the death rate or a spike in the total number of confirmed, I guess, people having, with all the testing going on, we're going to know that more people are going to test positive. Is it all based on the testing and hospital then? Is that what it is? Because this is a little scary, spending money you don't have.
So Representative Ehart, this is Bobby Joe. I'll take a first swing at that. So exactly what you talked about having to go back because of a spike is why the governor is doing this in 2-week increments. By doing it in 2-week increments, right, you can manage it. And so with the goal of not having a spike. And so his goal is to open things up, to do it in a very responsible, managed way so that we don't have to go back. What they will look at, I think one of the main criteria that they will look at is, the strain on hospitals statewide. And so what does that mean for their PPE, ventilators, beds, things like that. So I can assure you that one of the main reasons that we are taking this in 2-week increments and phasing some of this out is so we can avoid a spike, because that is the one thing you'll hear the governor say, that he thinks that would be probably the worst thing to happen for our economy, is to have to open up and then go back to where we were. And he just doesn't want to do that.
Okay, that perfect. And Representative Young, just one quick phase 2 follow-up. Idaho Falls just canceled 4th of July parade. Is that fairly common right now? Our 4th of July, and I know that would fall under large, but we'd be kind of past that deadline. Is everyone canceling their 4th of July celebration? I'm just curious. Are you hearing about that?
We've heard from a couple people that they have, or they've canceled parades or some rodeos. We haven't heard from a ton, but we have heard from some. I can tell you the governor does a weekly call with cities and counties, and that's been a big question, right, is they're trying to do planning. And I think, what's tough is there's just so much uncertainty right now. So we have heard from a few, but I do think a lot are still kind of trying to weigh that out right now.
Thank you.
I have one question that's in the chat box related to that. Are they going to cancel the Western Idaho State Fair or the Eastern Idaho State Fair, to your knowledge?
This is Sam. I haven't heard anything. I mean, we're getting emails constantly, and so some other staffer could be talking to them, and I don't know it. But I think those are typically aren't they in August?
Yeah.
So, and the governor's staged approach just goes through the last date. Stage 4 goes through June 26th. So in that last stage, it says, public and private gatherings of more than 50 people where appropriate physical distancing and precautionary measures are observed, those can occur. And that's just through June 26th. So obviously we're kind of taking this 2 weeks at a time as best we can, but as far out as into August, it's hard for us to predict. But I mean, hopefully all goes well. I can tell you a lot of entities are kind of taking in the consumer confidence into calculation. I don't think it's necessarily anything the state's doing. It's more so maybe they're hearing from patrons and people that would normally travel in saying, either economically or just because they're concerned about the virus, regardless of what any of the states are doing, they just themselves don't want to get out and do those kind of things. I think some people are just precautionarily getting out ahead of that and canceling, because I've had a number of conferences and stuff that are well outside July, August, September that have just been canceled. I think just out of abundance of caution.
Okay, so I think we've got a good sense of stage 1 or phase 1 and phase 2. Can you tell us what changes with phase 3?
Sure. So I've got it pulled up here. So in stage 3, this is probably the least exciting stage, but gatherings of 10 to 50 people would be appropriate or allowed, again, with the physical distancing caveat. And then something I haven't really talked about yet that was in the other stages is we're really discouraging, travel for non-essential purposes, and that's broadly defined. There's not really any, but just avoiding traveling, to other states or other countries and then coming back if you can. One thing that we're working on specific to outdoor recreation is a campaign encouraging people, and the rural communities are a good example of this. People from Boise will, just to get out, because a lot of people are stuck at home, are going camping and hiking, and we didn't want to shut that down, but we're engaging in a pretty active marketing campaign to encourage people to try to have a minimal footprint on whatever community or area it is that they're going to, like pack in, pack out. Earlier on, you guys were probably seeing grocery stores, and maybe you're still having issues with grocery stores being wiped out of, toilet paper and other things. And that's only compounded when you have people from Ada County coming in and hunting and fishing and camping in your area, and then further compounding that issue. So we're doing the best we can to encourage people to travel smart, specific to recreation, but kind of for all reasons. So, but in stage 3, travel could resume. There would be an encouragement not to travel to areas where there's still significant community spread of the virus. But again, that's just that, most of these are just encouragement and strong suggestions, not mandates. But so this would fall in that category that, travel can resume, but just be cautious. A lot of you probably also heard that we have a 14-day quarantine requirement from people traveling out of state into the state of Idaho. I know some of the border communities have expressed a significant concern, especially in North Idaho on the Panhandle, and then on some of the southern border communities about, especially where these states have a lot of restrictions in place. Washington's a good example. They shut down like everything. You can't even fish in Washington. So we had a huge influx, especially when the weather hinted at being nice, people coming into the state. We heard from local communities. Also, they were coming from areas like Seattle and Spokane, where there was, a significant case of community spread. So we put a requirement in that if you come into the state, you have to quarantine for 14 days, meaning you kind of have to hang tight. You can go to, you can get food and the necessities to get by, but other than that, you're expected to stay inside. I know a lot of people question the enforceability behind that, and it's difficult to enforce. And we've mostly, not mostly, we've totally just been educating people on that piece of it. So that 14-day quarantine requirement would be lifted in stage 3. Bars and nightclubs in stage 3 are still closed, but they're encouraged to start prepping to open, again with the giant caveat that assuming all goes well. And then same with larger venues like the movie theaters and the sporting arenas and those kind of things are still closed, but also encouraged to prepare to open for stage 4.
Okay. Let's see, we've got a couple of questions here. Elias, you had a question.
Hey, this is Elias Trejo. I'm a real estate agent and I own a brokerage in Southeast Idaho. I have a couple questions, and I also kind of want to make a few comments. So year over year, last year in April and this year in April, in the Idaho Falls Snake River MLS, the total sales have actually dropped 28%. And I think we're just kind of barely seeing the beginning of what that's going to look like. For me personally, I haven't got a haircut in a month or trim my beard, which I'm totally fine with, and I look like it. But when I think about my stylist, she's a single mom living in an apartment. She just barely moved to a new community. She's struggling. So I guess my question is for the long term, because here's the reality: we started with 0 cases, and then we started growing, in cases that we have in Idaho. When phase 4 comes, COVID isn't going to be gone. It's still going to be around. We're not going to completely eradicate this thing from the state of Idaho. Are we just planning on potentially going back and closing everything down and starting over again? At what point At what point are we actually going to consider just saying, you know what, let's everyone take the precautions that we deem necessary and open up and try to continue life in general? Because I appreciate and love these precautions that we're taking to save lives. At the same time, just from what I'm hearing is if we get to stage 3, and it's going to do what it's going to do, unfortunately. I think we're not going to be able to stop it because it goes from person to person so easy. But I mean, what's the end game here? I mean, if we get to stage 3 and 4 and we start seeing an increase in in COVID cases because we're increasing our testing and people are getting back out to regular life, are we just going to shut back down again? Or at what point can we accept, as a state at least, that there's another virus that we have to deal with as humanity, and we can't completely shut down the economy forever? Is that ever going to be an option, or are we just going to wait and hope that we learn more about this virus and 8 months later say, you know what, we're going to have to just reopen, this is what we have to deal with, and in the meantime we leave 8 months worth of carnage behind?
So this is Bobby Joe. I'll take a first swing at that, and then I think Alex has some stuff to add on his end. But absolutely, as testing increases, we're gonna be seeing more cases, which is the whole point, right? Is people can be testing more, those cases are going to increase. What the governor is really watching, and you can talk to your hospitals, it's about the hospital capacity. And so, just because we have increases in COVID cases doesn't mean that we're in a bad spot. It's kind of, where we are for our hospital capacity. And this has always been about, that surge effect, that what is the capacity that hospitals can handle if they got a lot of cases at once. And so I think everyone expects that as testing increases, which is awesome, we all want to see that. I think that gives confidence, it gives clarity. It's going to allow us to just kind of get back to normal in some sense. We're going to see those cases increase. So I think what you're going to see the health professionals really looking at is really the hospital side of things and what their capacity is. And that's why we continue to focus as a state to ensuring that we have PPE and all of that stuff that the hospitals need so that they're prepared as, cases may increase that come through the hospitals. And then Alex, I think you had some stuff to add.
Before Alex goes, I just want to, so make sure you guys understand, and I'm sure you do, but when Bobby Joe said that we're always trying to increase testing, and so so optically it's going to look like potentially that we have more positive cases, but I know you guys know, but that's a percentage to the number of testing. So that doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden we have more people infected, right. As you guys know, it just means we've increased our testing. So we're not doing it based on the number of positive tests. It's the percentage of positive tests relative to the number of tests that were given. So as long as we don't see a huge increase in the percentage of people, or we don't see an increase in the percentage of people in positive tests, then that means we're trending well, and then we can keep continuing. So concerned people saying, well, we just spiked, we got a ton of new positive tests. Well, we also happen to test a lot more people on that given day or whatever it was. So it's all relative to the number of tests that were counted.
And I think, and thank you. Oh, sorry about that. Thank you for answering that. It does appear, that there's going to be spikes, and it's all going to be relevant on what we're doing. But I mean, even reading that there's a lot of hospitals that are laying off their employees and things, like it would just be great to try to figure out something where even the hospitals aren't, incentivized by putting, and I don't know if this is true, but it's things that I've, seen, but I don't want to have hospitals write down COVID as a cause of death to get, try to get extra money if that's a real thing, because they're losing money on the other side and other things. And at the same time, it's like we have so many hospitals. I think about Blackfoot, we have, I think of, just Ermac, Portneuf, and Bingham. It's like, couldn't we reopen, have the hospitals work together? Because I read that Bingham might be losing $10 million this year if things continue. It's like, wouldn't it be worth to start a coalition and say, okay, this hospital is going to be the COVID hospital. This is where we got to put resources for this area here so we can continue, life in general, because it does. And I'll be honest, personally on my side with my brokerage, with our business, during downturns and things like that, we grow. So I mean, if there's a downturn in some of the economy, it would be good for our brokerage, but for the overall sense and overall health of that, and I'm not just thinking economy, I'm thinking of each individual person, is locking them down all the way to stage 4, stage 3, the best answer.
This is Alex, and this is Alex. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Outstanding. Appreciate the sentiment. I think one point I was just going to make is at no point did any of the governor's orders shut down elective procedures at medical facilities. Some health systems made that decision on their own in order to preserve personal protective equipment and other things like that, but that was a choice that those systems made. We do know that in instances when that choice was made, that in some cases they are strapped financially, but there has been some federal funds made available directly to health systems to help them through what is considered troubling times. I was going to just touch on some of the small business components. You mentioned the stylist that's hurting, and I think the governor is very sympathetic to those cases. And one thing I just wanted to say is I oversee the federal funding that the state of Idaho has received. And we did receive $1.25 billion through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And statutorily, a very strict reading of how those funds could be used is it's limited to government expenses that are directly attributed to COVID that are incurred from March to December, which doesn't seem to leave a lot of wiggle room. But late last week, the Trump administration opened the door to second order effects, saying that they know that COVID has caused second order effects on individuals as well as small businesses. And it's nudged states into considering the use of those funds for small business economic support. And since that guidance came out last week, the governor has tasked his staff with reviewing what options might be available. And what I would encourage you to do is tune into the governor's press conference tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. because I think you're going to see him take some significant steps in the direction of looking at economic support for small businesses in alignment with the Trump administration's guidance. So he's sympathetic. We know that small businesses have had to suspend operations in some cases. They have reduced sales. They have shortages of critical inventory and materials, or they have increased costs due to social distancing and other preventive measures. And I think you'll see him announce some steps to help small businesses who are really the backbone of our economy and, frankly, the engines of rural Idaho in many, many instances. So certainly tune in tomorrow at 11.
Great, thank you. So we have several similar questions for you, and I'm going to try to kind of push them together. And if I miss a piece of something that someone was hoping to have asked, just let me know. So the question is, county by county, how much of this is going to happen county by county instead of just a statewide order?
Representative Young, this is Bobby Joe. So the Stay Healthy, as the one right now, it'll be a statewide approach. And one thing that you'll consistently hear the governor say is that when asked, why isn't it more regional? Why are you not doing it by county? Is that when you do it, by county or by areas affected, you really just incentivize high risk areas to go to low risk areas. And so, you saw that in Blaine County with folks going to Twin Falls or going to Stanley or Chalice or Salmon. And you saw it here in Ada County with folks going to Valley County. So that is kind of, one of the reasons why we do it statewide, but yet it will continue. This next Stay Healthy will be statewide.
All right, I'm going to step in here. It looks like Julianne's camera has frozen up. I'm just going to give her a phone call. But we do have some other questions here that are coming in. And one of them says businesses are opening throughout the state regardless of the executive order. Local officials seem to express they will not enforce. What ramifications can people expect if they open earlier than their recommended phase?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is Sam. So, you know, it's a no-win situation, obviously. The governor's mantra from the beginning on any of these orders is, you know, has been to educate, to not come in. I mean, it's counter to every fiber, and I think pretty much any of our conservative bones that to have a heavy hand of government. So that's been his approach, even with this, is to try to educate as much as possible. You know, the order does have the force and effect of law. There is an enforcement component that we can use. Obviously, we don't want to use it as a state. You know, we have heard of individual, you know, businesses and stuff defying the order. You know, we've been working with local law enforcement because they're the first line of defense, obviously. You know, our state police has been working with local law enforcement to try to contact those individuals, those businesses, and let them know. I mean, at this point, I don't think it's a lack of education. It's beyond that at this point for most businesses, I would say. You know, trying to talk through with them, you know, and then the response though is that we hear from the compliant business next door that they feel slighted, that their neighbor is, you know, defying the order, if you want to call it that, and it's affecting their business now because they're like, well, maybe we should open too, and so there's a domino effect. There's a consumer trust and confidence component with it. You know, there's plenty of backlash, and I know the governor's pointed to the kind of the peer pressure part of it before as well. But you know, the governor and law enforcement don't want to cite people. That's the last thing they want to do. So, you know, that's a long way of saying we're trying to communicate with them. We do have the ability to cite. Law enforcement has the ability to do that. They may reserve that for egregious circumstances. You know, there's also issues with licensure, businesses that require a license from the state. You know, we've had those conversations, but again, it goes back to, we don't want to have the conversations about what we do. We'd rather people comply, but you know, there is certain licensure, like liquor licenses and licenses through Board of Occupational Licensure that certain businesses have that I guess could be subject to, you know, suspension potentially, but we haven't fully explored those options because we're hoping that people will be largely compliant. We still expect and assume that people will be largely compliant. I mean, it's like anything, any society, anything, anywhere. There's people going to, you know, especially as time goes on, people are going to be less and less compliant. But again, you know, we think that the approach that the governor has with the stages is a good approach and the right approach. And we're trying to be, you know, as safe with the public health and safety at the forefront of the mind, also being one of the first states in the country to implement a plan like this and adopt a plan like this that, you know, again, we were one of the last states to even get the virus, and now on the back end, we're one of the first states to start opening up. So we're trying to balance everything and do our best.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your response. Is there anyone else that would like to reply to that or add to that?
I would. This is Elias again. Sorry to just barge in. So we sometimes we call Ada County the state of Ada because they, you know, kind of operate on their own deal. This is where I think for most small business owners, at least in Southeast Idaho, and you know, when I'm looking at Bannock and Bingham and Bonneville County, a lot of times we get so caught up in what's going on in Ada as a state that we do this whole, you know, statewide issue order. We have less cases than, yeah, I mean, we only have 43 cases between the three counties, and yet because of what's going on in Ada County and Blaine County, there are small businesses in Bingham County, where we only have 3 confirmed cases according to this website that I'm looking at, provided by the state. When will we start considering, kind of like the federally, we're letting states decide on their own based on their cases? When will we take that same approach? And it's kind of an answer like county by county, because it's crazy to me that there are businesses shutting down in Bingham County because of what's going on in Ada County. And it's just, we're so spread out, we're so different. A stay-at-home order for us, at least to me, doesn't make sense, because there are different things happening in Bonneville compared to Ada and Blaine County. Like the people that live there, the people that visit there are totally different.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. For this next stage, for stage 1, it's going to continue to be a statewide approach from the governor. But, I think, those are things that continue to be evaluated. And, those are things the governor looks at when he makes these decisions. But for this next stage, it will continue to be statewide.
All right, can people hear me now? Sorry, my internet died. I think it's a little stressed out right now. Everybody doesn't have anything else to do. I missed a part of that, but I did want to go back real quick and just make sure that I understood what phase 4 is about. We kind of have talked about all of the other phases. Is phase 4, we're back to life as normal, or are we still talking about some restrictions in phase 4?
So, good question. To be honest, I don't think we're going to be back to normal for a while in the sense of how we operate as a society. I think regardless of whether we, as the state, does anything or not, I just think everybody's going to be treating their everyday lives differently. I was just reading an article before this call about Japan and their response, and for a while they were kind of being treated as a shining example, and they were being, allotted for maybe not just for not overreacting to the virus, and there wasn't a spike, but now they're starting to see quite a bit of an increase in cases. But one of the reasons that they attribute to a lower number of cases is just as a society and a culture, they don't interact close as like Americans do. They wear masks everywhere they go for the most part. So that's a long way of saying I think those kind of cultural norms are going to be different. I think a lot more people are going to be wary of shaking hands and close contact with people outside their families. I think a lot more people are going to be wearing masks, again, without obviously the state doing or saying anything. So I think the intent for the state's purposes of curbing the virus and maintaining a healthcare capacity, we're hopeful that these 4 stages that get us through June is all that as a state. I don't want to say all, but, as far as orders or any sort of, intense government involvement, that will largely cease or at least be largely abridged. But I think until there's at least a vaccine or herd immunity or those kind of therapeutics for the drug, I think every day's lives are going to be different for a while.
Which business is essential? Since I missed a little bit.
Sorry, will you repeat that question, Julianne?
Did we already ask the question, how does the governor decide which businesses are essential?
I don't believe so.
So this is Sam again, and I can take a stab at that question for sure. Again, we're largely trying to move away from non-essential versus essential, and the last month and a half has been a stay-home order. Now it's moving to a stay healthy order, and we're trying to open up as many businesses as we can. As we went through we go through the stages, and I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but in talking with the epidemiologists and the other healthcare experts, we wanted to focus on businesses in stage 1 that, the reason they were largely chosen for stage 1 was the fact that they're more equipped and set up to be conducive for social distancing and sanitation. And then, obviously, personal care where there's, a lot of contact and constant contact between individuals that don't know each other. That's more conducive for spread than some of the other businesses. So that's why we chose the businesses and the types of gatherings that we chose in the stages, is because we felt that for the most part, starting with businesses that are, it's easier to social distance in, and then move through as long as things go well, move through the stages. And, then we start with restaurants and gyms, and there's a lot more contact interaction, and we'll see how that goes. And then we can move to larger venues and see how that goes. And hopefully it all goes well, So that was largely the lens through that the governor and his work group looked at, when picking the businesses, I guess if you want to call it that.
Okay, and just kind of along those lines, and it sounds like you may be moving this way, but there's just some questions and comments indicating, how much consideration has been given to the idea of just asking people to follow specific protocol, safety guidelines instead of picking and choosing who gets to do what.
Representative, can you repeat the question? You cut out.
Oh, okay. I apologize. So the question, it sounds like from the last comment that there is a movement toward looking more at safety guidelines and protocol and less at picking and choosing who can do what. Is that something that we should expect to see a continuation of, and a moving away from picking and choosing who can do what?
So yeah, Representative, I think you'll see in the Rebound Idaho document. So, we're about to go into stage 1, then stage 2. In stage 2, I think the only thing that's not open is bars, and then of course dealing with large venues and folks, in that sort of realm. But, I think as Sam said, when you look at the essential, that was, things as food services and things like that. And so, definitely want to get as many businesses back up and running as we can and as quickly as we can. But, it goes back to those phases of doing it in a fashion where we don't overload and then have to go back, because I think that's the last thing the governor wants to do. And so, I think hopefully here within the next few weeks, most everything will be opened up.
Okay, great. I'm going to give you one other question here that was submitted earlier. And this, I think, kind of flows here. We've talked about a lot of different kinds of businesses, but in this area, agriculture is really important. And one of the things that we're seeing is that because some of the processing and those things are not going on, we have a real backup in our agricultural product supply line. So in terms of getting things up and running again, what things are you doing, or what strategies are you implementing to help us make sure that we get our supply line going again?
This is Sam. I feel like I'm getting picked on almost. I can answer that question. So I do a lot of the natural resource, and I do some agricultural policy stuff for the office too. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen what's been going on in some of the processing plants. I think, there's one in South Dakota and some in Washington where they've had, a heavy hit of COVID positive employees, and that's had a strain on supply lines. Tyson being a big example of that. I think we've been fairly fortunate in Idaho that component, positive workers component has been, knock on wood, and hopefully it remains so, not a huge problem. I think a lot of them are taking a lot of precautions to ensure that doesn't happen within their processing plants or packing plants and those kind of things. So the governor has actually had a couple of private conversations with Secretary Perdue. I've had a number of phone calls with Senator Risch's office, Representative Simpson's office, and the other congressionals on these ag issues. And so a couple weeks ago, a week ago, we were pushing pretty hard, and unfortunately, it wasn't the outcome we wanted. Maybe many of you know about some of the payment caps that were put on some of the funding that came out of the CARES Act, and so USDA, Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture has about $19 billion that they got to address COVID. And then they were developing their formula for payment, to distribute funds to producers. And we were pushing hard because Idaho is different, as you guys all know, than Wisconsin versus like New York. And I'll use the dairy industry specifically. There was an issue where the dairies in New York, there's a lot of small dairies. And then in Idaho, we're different. We have quite a few larger dairies and less small family-run dairies. Yet we were all subject to the same payment cap. It'd be akin to a family of 10 getting $1,200 stimulus check versus a family of 2 getting the same stimulus check. And so we were working with payment caps. We were trying to push back and say the formula shouldn't be based on a cap. It should be based on whatever the commodity is. If it's by tonnage, by weight produced, that should be the funding. That unfortunately hasn't really been well received, and so we're still working on that. But we have been successful to work with USDA, and we're working on trying to get some funds. They've allotted, and I have the whole breakdown. If you want it, I can send it to you of all the different funds. But for example, of the 19 billion, there's allocated 9.6 billion for the livestock industry, 3.9 billion for row crops, 2.9 billion for dairy, and that'll obviously trickle down, I think, through the farm services agencies in the states. So we're also working on kind of, everybody calls it the phase 4 or round 4 of funding. There's potential for some block grants for agriculture to come out of that to further alleviate and to make sure that we have, a consistent supply chain of food, because that's obviously a big deal. So there's still more effort that's taking place at the federal level on that stage 4. And our Department of Ag is working closely with me and also with the federal delegation to try to give the states as much discretion as possible on those funds that come to the states, so that since we know best how, what our industry looks like and what the makeup of the industry is, so we can disperse those funds appropriately. I think Alex or Bobby Joe wanted to add something.
And I'll just add, I think what's tricky for a state like Idaho, right, is that, we are an export state. We produce a lot of products that we ship out of the state. And, COVID's not unique to Idaho. It's not unique to the United States. This is a worldwide thing. And I think, it's going to take some time as we see markets open back up. And so I think that's why it's really important that we continue to promote our products and try to support, that sector as these markets open up and we can get back into them. But, I think, for agriculture, these are tough times right now, because this is not just unique to Idaho or the United States, but this is a worldwide issue in those markets. It affects all of that.
All right, thank you. Now we're getting down to where we have about 5 minutes left in terms of what I told you, Bobby Joe and Alex and Sam. I do have enough questions that we could keep going for a little while longer than that. Tell me what your availability is. Should we ask the ones at the top of the pile here real fast, or do you think we could stay for another 15 minutes or so?
15's great. We're good for 15.
Okay. Alrighty. So we have some questions here about taxes, and questions about, will there be an increase in tax rates to cover the shortfall? And if businesses are required to tighten their belts, will the governor and the institutions also be required to do with less? So 2 related questions there, pretty similar.
Thank you, Representative Young. This is Alex Adams. So maybe just a look at the state of the economy first. We did publish our new economic forecast today. And when we forecast revenue, you generally try to do multiple different scenarios, ranging from an optimistic scenario to a pessimistic scenario, just so you have kind of an idea of the total picture you're looking at. Under the optimistic scenario for fiscal year 21, which is the budget year that starts July 1, the optimistic scenario is that we would lose 4% of our revenue. The pessimistic scenario is that we would lose 14.5% of total state revenue. So that's from a slowing of sales tax as well as the loss of income tax from individuals who are not working, which leads to less income tax withholding and income tax filings in the subsequent year. So best case scenario, minus 4%. Most pessimistic scenario forecasted today, minus 14.5%. So when you look at the state's obligation to balance the budget, which is constitutionally enshrined, the governor has 4 levers to pull. Tax increases, budget cuts, use of federal funds, or use of rainy day funds. The governor has unequivocally stated that tax increases is not an option. So you guys can cross that off of the list. The governor will not consider it and has not considered it, and therefore it is not an essential thing for us to discuss. In terms of the remaining 3 variables, I've spent quite a bit of time working with the governor over the last 3 weeks, talking about which levers he would pull from rainy day funds to federal funds to cuts and how hard he would pull those levers. And frankly, where we started is cuts to agency budgets. The governor has pulled the trigger on a 1% budget reduction in the current fiscal year that we're in, and he's asked agencies to prepare for a 5% budget reduction in the next fiscal year. Now, one thing to know is that those stack on top of the budget cuts the governor had already built into those budgets. So the 1% cut in this fiscal year is on top of the 1% cut he had built in when we budgeted in January. And the 5% cut next year is on top of the 2% cut that he had budgeted in January. So the governor's making sure we use this as an opportunity to streamline state government, ensure that we're operating efficiently, and that we're living within the means of the revenue picture that we understand. The other thing that the state has been pretty prudent about, and certainly we appreciate Representative Young and Representative Ehart for their support in recent years, is shoring up the state's rainy day funds. Idaho is top 10 nationwide in rainy day funds. Those have been absolutely essential for us to get through tough times in the past, and the state has been committed to rebuilding those so that we can meet our constitutional obligation for a balanced budget. So, the governor intends to cut. A couple other things that we did was the governor sent out a memo to all agencies last month asking them to slow spending. And a couple of things we did was we froze hiring. So there was a statewide hiring freeze, and we also froze salaries for state employees. So each year the legislature appropriates funding for state employees in order to maintain cost of living and things like that. And the governor did freeze salaries statewide. And we also encouraged consideration of things like furloughs and stuff like that. And you're seeing a lot of the universities move forward with furlough plans. You've probably read it, even about the Boise State football coaches taking furloughs. So we are taking action to ensure that at no point in the near future does the state have to come to the taxpayers and ask for more of their hard-earned dollars. So you can have confidence in that.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. Maybe just to backtrack, there was a question earlier in the chat box about enforcement. Can you speak to the issue of enforcement? And I know we're talking about saying, well, go ahead and open up over 80% of businesses by May 1st. That's not too far away. But if somebody were open and say they, were not, it wasn't their phase yet, what kind of enforcement would people need to be concerned about, or what's your approach to that?
He did address that.
Okay, I might have been gone. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Alrighty, So maybe just to give a quick overview on these stages. So we're talking about 80% of business open by May 1st. We are talking about adding on May 16th, indoor gyms, salons, massage. Did we talk about any expectations as far as plans that you want businesses to make or anything like that associated with opening up?
Yeah, thanks, Representative. This is Sam. Another good question. So in general, no, with the exception of restaurants. And again, with the local health districts being overwhelmed, we're only asking that the restaurants submit their plans of operation to the local health districts. They don't have to be approved for them to open up when they can open up in stage 2. That was we felt that was important, obviously, because we didn't want a race to the health districts for restaurants, and the first ones to get approved are the ones that can open. We wanted to create parity and have as many restaurants as possible open up as soon as they possibly could. So with that one exception, there's no requirement that plans be submitted. We're encouraging businesses to develop plans aimed at consumer confidence. I think the objective is me as a patron or whoever else that wants to visit the business that has some insecurities about the protocols and those kind of things can be able to access that, or whether maybe the business puts it on Facebook to say, here's a picture of the restaurant and our tables are 6 feet apart, and we have credit card machines so people don't have to exchange with cash, or those kind of instances. So that's obviously not a mandate from the state. We're encouraging it because we think that'll go a long way for consumer confidence, for people to more readily patron a business if they feel comfortable when they enter that there is, obviously we can't prevent everything, but they're as safe as possible.
Did we lose y'all?
There we
Are folks
go.
still on the line?
Sorry about that. Julianne's trying to get back on, but she wanted to ask a little bit more about that. Can you summarize phase 3 and phase 4 and maybe clarify when we're going to be done with this?
Sure. So let's see, I'll answer the last question first. So again, with the caveat that if everything goes well, stage 4, which is the last stage, ends on June 26th. And that's, stage 4 starts on June 13th. And that's, I'll just read it, bars and nightclubs can operate, large venues can operate, so long as they follow social distancing. Travel can continue, with, again, with the caution of avoiding places that have widespread community spread of the virus. Gatherings of more than 50 can continue, again, with the suggestion to social distance. So that's kind of the culmination of all the stages, and, hopefully everything goes well. And, like I said earlier, I still think the social norms are going to be different than they were when we entered this whole issue. But as far as any sort of state enforcement or state recommendations, those are hopefully going to be few and far between, knock on wood, that we get there and all goes well, that we can go back to some semblance of normalcy in the summer.
Okay, thank you so much. I have a question here that I'm actually kind of interested in more of also. What response are we taking to the increases in suicides? I guess there's been some of that. And how do those factor into the decisions around mental, physical, and emotional health decisions being made for the entire state? So I guess
So one of the,
Go ahead.
I was just thinking maybe I could simplify that a little bit. I guess what are the precautions that's being taken for those where the hospitals are, I'm sure, open for those patients, but what do you have to say as far as what the state is, the governor is thinking about that?
Sure. So this is Alex. I don't know if I'm the best person to speak to this since I don't do health policy for the governor, but I do oversee the regulatory agenda for the governor. And I know he's waived over 150 regulations to date since this started. And a lot of what he's focused on is removing barriers to access to healthcare services for individuals, specifically restrictions on telehealth. And mental health services were traditionally not provided through telehealth platforms. And that's been one of the things that's been pretty important to the governor, is ensuring that that's a possibility, and also working with the insurance companies to ensure that telehealth is reimbursed. So we've waived a number of restrictions, even allowing psychologists across state lines to perform mental health services and things like that. So I would say a lot of our focus has been trying to build capacities that individuals can still access the services that they need at an affordable rate while there's social distancing and other guidelines in effect. So beyond that, I would defer to Sarah Stover, the governor's health policy director, who unfortunately was not able to join us tonight, but we could certainly get more information and follow up with you. I don't know if Sam or Bobby Joe have anything else to add.
Yeah. So I mean, what Alex said, we're not the most up to speed on the mental health issues, but I was sitting in a meeting where this came up earlier with the governor. You know, and we do have a 24-hour hotline. You can also text it, which I think is a good thing too. You know, there's the suicide hotline for those, and like Alex said, you know, as a part of the rule waivers too, and trying to make as much as possible available to those through means that in channels that weren't normally available. And so that's a good example of a lot of the, you know, what the governor's been focused on with his authorities is enabling access and trying to get these people that through channels and means that are non-traditional to be able to get the health care that they need, whether it's mental health or otherwise. And so that's one thing that's focused on. So, I mean, the hotline, if you just Google it, you can find it, but it's 398-4357. Also 398-HELP is the suicide hotline, and it's open 24 hours. And I didn't know that you could text it, that number, until today, so.
Great, thank you. Did you ask the unemployment insurance question? Did we finish that one?
Yes, I didn't ask that one.
You didn't yet? So that question was, if people's unemployment insurance rates go up because they've been required to close down, is there any?
Hi, yeah, so Representative Young, this is Bobby Joe. So one of the actions that the governor took early on was an executive order to waive that. So business ratings won't be affected during COVID. So people having to be laid off and go on unemployment won't affect their business rating.
Okay, great.
I don't know, we might have to just open it up for some more discussion until she comes back on. She's probably pretty frustrated. I'm not quite sure what she was going to ask, but there are some really great questions here.
Wendy, I can hear you.
There you are. Great. Okay. I'll just keep trying to fill in for you.
Thank you. I am so sorry. But the last thing I wondered about is if Bobby Joe or Alex or Sam might have any questions for these grassroots folks that are dealing with the real life realities of this stuff. Are there questions, things that you're working on that you would like to have their feedback on?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that opportunity. You know, we haven't been able to travel. You know, that's a big part of our jobs is we try to get out and about and travel. And, you know, right now we're just not able to do that. So I guess it would just be good to kind of get perspective of what's going on in your area and how folks are feeling, you know, about COVID and the plan. Would love to hear, you know, what the businesses think about the rebound plan, especially those that are in the, you know, stage 2, stage 3. So we just love any of that feedback that you all want to provide for us.
Might I be able to respond to that, Representative Young?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Coulter.
You know, we've had a lot of conversation. In fact, I talked to a half dozen, if not more, business owners today. And it's interesting to hear some of the statistics, but also the concerns of, you know, not having a reserve amount of cash to be able to survive through a shutdown like this. And I heard other statistics where if a business is to shut down for 90 days or more, they will shut their doors permanently. And as we explore the fact that we're pushing many of these businesses from, you know, early to mid-March to middle of June and beyond, that's definitely 90 days, if not more. And so are we prepared for up to 6 rate of 20 to 30 to 50%? Are we prepared for the backlash of many people being unemployed, some of them being independent contractors or, you know, their own businesses? I see and recognize the estimates of 4 to 14% potential decreases in our tax base, but that's 100% loss to a lot of these business owners. And the preparation of, you know, them being prepared for that from a mental, a physical, and emotional standpoint, beyond just the economics of it, the divorce rates and the trickling effect beyond just the potential of contracting the disease concerns me as much as it does, you know, contracting COVID-19 or anything else that might impact businesses and the owners of them. So there's many concerns circulating. There's new Facebook groups and movements to try and take action. What action can a business owner take right now if they really are at risk of losing their business in the next 6 weeks because they've waited based on the recommendation of the governor?
So, you know, I think a recommendation I would have, and I'm assuming, you know, most of these businesses have done that, is, you know, through the SBA, there are some programs, you know, the PPP and the SBA loans. You know, I think Alex mentioned earlier to stay tuned for an announcement tomorrow that the governor is going to make regarding some of the federal CARES dollars going towards small businesses. So, you know, that would be recommendations that I make is, you know, look into those programs, you know, talk to your local chambers of commerce, you know, talk to the SBA about those certain programs because, you know, the PPP program is probably the best that we've heard about. And, you know, there are some of those federal resources to help, you know, kind of get through as things get moving back up.
And Bobby Joe,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We applied and didn't qualify for anything significant. And because we applied for one, we can't apply for the other. And we don't want to go into debt over this. What's the solution there?
So I think one of the criticisms of the federal Paycheck Protection Program is that it wasn't very well targeted. And I've read news reports of everybody from the Los Angeles Lakers to Shake Shack having received loans that were intended for small businesses, and either of those would probably meet by definition of small Main Street businesses. And I think the governor's pretty sympathetic to that. And I think when he announces what he intends to announce tomorrow morning, that he's really going to look at targeting resources to businesses that have fallen through the cracks of some of these federal programs, those that either didn't qualify for PPP or those that were unable to receive that. So at risk of getting too far ahead of our boss, I think I'll just ask you to tune into his press conference tomorrow.
Hey, Julianne. Whoops. Hello. Hello.
You're on, Barbara. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hey, Bobby Joe and Sam and Alex, there's one thing that I know the governor is talking a lot about. He's talking about, consumer confidence and, the ability that in opening in stages that's going to help with consumer confidence and people coming back. And I think that we all understand as, business owners or, as employees that anytime, either when you're starting a business or when you're in this situation of trying to start something back up, it's going to start slowly. Everybody's not coming back. Even those who decide to come back aren't coming back right at the beginning. So the longer everything is delayed, the longer it's going to take for them to come back. So it's not so much a question, it's just kind of a reminder that this idea of consumer confidence is an interesting idea, because that consumer confidence actually starts the day you open. Just a thought that I'd throw out there, because it's going to take time for everyone to build back up. So just remember that.
Thanks, Representative. Yeah, that's something we've been talking about in our Economic Rebound Committee, and it was really to that point, like that you just said, that giving businesses the opportunity to open up so that they can, get that consumer confidence. And so that's the goal and that's the plan, and hopefully we can provide some resources on the state level for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, my name's Heidi, and I joined a little later, so I don't know if this question was asked or not, but my company has a very strong seasonality. I'm in the tanning industry, and because of that, we were lumped together with hair salons and gyms, and when we clean our beds, we actually use a hospital grade solution, and we're opening up underneath the second phase. Now, when the governor is going to address the state, is he planning on addressing us on the 2-week interval, or is he planning on addressing us on a weekly base? Because we're actually in the industry, I know that there's not a lot of tanning salons in the state. So we don't have a lot of salons that can actually survive with the amount of money that we're bringing in right now, because our season actually ends in June. So with us holding on to the next 2 weeks and opening up on May 16th, we're running out of cash fast.
Yeah, this is Sam. That's good input. Honestly, I hadn't thought about the seasonality. We've gotten a lot of calls on tanning salons for sure, and you probably saw that those are squarely in stage 2, which is in 2 weeks from now, which I know is 2 weeks more for you all, which is difficult. And I wish I had more comforting things to say other than that. These are the painstaking issues and that we had in conversations with the governor when we were talking about how, because everybody agreed we had to open it up in phases, and how do we put things in different phases so we're not opening all at once, and what's the best, with the input from the health experts, which ones would make the most sense to open early, and understanding that these kind of personal care businesses depend on the you know, tanning's a little different than like, you know, nails and hair, possibly because of the contact, but then there's the spray tanning, and I'm not an expert on all that stuff, but you know, the contact issue was the reason that they were put into stage 2. So there, you know, that was largely the discussion that we had was, you know, what was the best time for each one. And because of the personal contact between, you know, customer and employer, they were put into phase 2. And so hopefully you guys can get by for 2 more weeks. And I will say that we're putting out guidance as fast as we can. You know, we have guidance coming out for restaurants, which are in phase 2. Hopefully that's gonna be out the next day or 2. I'll check with health and welfare to see if we're getting guidance on some of those other industries, you know, like hair. I'm pretty confident we'll have one for barbers and those types as well. And I'll ask them specifically about tanning salons.
So we just want to thank them for being here. And then I would like to invite the rest of you to stay for just a minute longer. So thank you so much to the governor's office. We appreciate you being here to answer questions, and we appreciate you being willing to listen to our concerns, and I'm sure that you'll continue to hear some of those moving forward. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Representative, and you know, please don't hesitate to keep funneling questions our way. Same with you, Representative Ehart.
Yeah, let me just say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always great to dialogue directly with constituents throughout the state, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Yep, thank you.
Great. So one quick question before everybody hops off for all of you. As you're looking around at what's going on and you're listening, you've got your ear to the ground and stuff, do you feel like there's some reasonable help for you over the next few weeks available on more of a local level? Or are you feeling kind of hung out to dry, wondering what's going to happen next?
Hung out to dry.
Hung out to dry. Okay. Any?
I don't see anything at the local level to where our local governments can help the businesses unless they just support the fact that we need to reopen. I look at the restaurants I frequent on a regular basis, they are going out of business. They just will, because a lot of companies, and I don't know how to pronounce your name, but Briley, you know, I sympathize with these salon owners and tanning bed, you know, facilities and massage therapists that all are independents that depend on this income. And if we cut out 90 days out of a calendar year, that's 25% of their business, and they're lucky if they're profitable at the end of the year. And so it's been mentioned in the comments and in the chat that we are driving people into more debt, and regardless of if it comes from the SBA or, you know, the local credit union, it is debt that has to be paid off, whether it's in 2 years or 30 years. And the way that we have to pay rent and utilities and taxes is probably extended out to another week or month or year that we have to pay that off in debt. That's the scary thought, is that we're bound to something that we didn't have any control over by not being able to open and go back to free commerce like we have been used to, with the risk of this health crisis or pandemic, but now it's most definitely an economic pandemic.
Now I have a couple of questions from Jen here in the sidebar. Can we address the Look, Ask, Share campaign? Jen, are you still on?
I am.
Okay. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
I just read about it, and I just started reading about it, I should say, and I have no idea what it is. It almost sounds like something you go through a process and your business is going to get this poster put in its window that says that you've committed to follow all the guidelines. Is that a statewide thing, or what is that exactly?
That's not something I've heard of yet. So
Coulter, do you know what that is?
I'm not familiar with the Look Ask Share campaign. What I'm familiar with is let's see, All Jobs Are Essential is a local group. Open Idaho is reopening Idaho responsibly and doing it. Those are campaigns that I'm aware of.
Sorry, Coulter,
Hey, you guys,
we're losing you. We don't.
you guys,
little-
yeah, the Look Ask Share is an Idaho Falls thing being promulgated by the City of Idaho Falls and the Chamber of Commerce. So that's not, anyway, that's nothing to do with the City of Idaho Falls, possibly Ammon, I don't know. So nothing to do with the state.
Okay, I just saw in the comments, Kevin Hansen mentioned that it's the Idaho Falls and Ammon mayors are speaking about it.
Yep.
It may be an Eastern Idaho focused movement, but
That's what it is with the chamber.
Great. You know, well, I would love information about that as to how that impacts not only our business, but we have hundreds of clients that we work with, and I would love to be able to share that with them as a resource locally.
Yep, but I don't think Bobby Joe or these guys know anything about it, so it's probably not germane to this topic because I don't think they know anything about it.
So is this something that we could do through our chamber here, Barbara?
Well, you might want to discuss if you want to do it too.
Yeah,
You know?
okay.
So
Good deal. So I guess the last thing that I have is I would like to talk again and just do another business roundtable Zoom meeting opportunity to see what resources we're finding out about, what ideas we might have to support each other and try and pull together as a community, because I don't think that it makes sense to just sit and wait for the federal money or even for state money, regardless of what the governor has to offer tomorrow. It's not likely to help everybody. So if everybody's open to it, I would be interested in having another Zoom meeting, maybe in a week. And I can advertise that again. Coulter, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would like invitations to things like this and have channels in which I'd like to help promote them. Can I express just a short concern on the recent comment in the chat room? So it's mentioning, so we're talking about this look, ask, and share is, it's about encouraging consumers to review businesses about whether they're adhering to good hygiene and health protocols. My concern is that I want these restaurants to survive, and if all of a sudden every single person is invited to police, there's going to be a different standard set by every individual that walks through that business owner's doors. And so, promoting the idea of 5-star reviews on Google, promoting the idea of, hey, we provide customer service. If all of a sudden, because the fork, or the tongs were placed in the wrong bowl to move the carrot from the peppers at the Mexican restaurant, we're screwed. That's not okay. And so that's my concern, is that if we start to hire every individual as a police officer of health in our communities, I mean, I was sickened by even the looks that I got as I walked through Walmart as I'm picking out a couple of items. It's just, we are changing ourselves from a culture standpoint, and our society is getting sick because of how we're going to view other people in our community. Rather than stopping and enjoying conversation in the store, we're going to look at them like they have two heads if they haven't done something right with their mask or with their, wiping down of a cart, whatever it may be. We can't create police officers out of every single individual. So I'm going to get passionate about this because I'm concerned for our businesses beyond, beyond just trying to make a buck so that they can feed their families when they go home at the end of the day.
That's what I said. You may want to discuss whether it's even wanted, Julianne. I'm not necessarily a big fan of it. Not at all.
Thank you. I was assuming it was something to help business, but it doesn't sound like it. So
We can't continue to implement regulation that restricts business from being conducted.
absolutely. So the kinds of projects I would like to explore if we're able to meet again in a week or so. I would love to invite some Chamber of Commerce people to be here, some of our local folks, and I would love to hear what kinds of ideas you came up with in the meantime, ways that we can connect those of us that have done well with those of us that are struggling, and we can find ways to support and help each other through this. So how many people would be up for a Zoom meeting this week and maybe invite some of the Chamber of Commerce? Or do you have other ideas for people that can help facilitate that?
Please.
Yeah, I'd be up for it.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm not sure how many are still on now.
There's about 13, including you and myself, so about 10, 11.
Okay. Well, if there's no dissenting opinion, maybe we'll plan to just send out an invitation again in a week. I'll try to invite some commerce folks and some other people that I think might be helpful in coming up with some ideas that can help our local small businesses to weather this thing. So talk to your friends and neighbors, talk to other business people, and we'll see what ideas we can come up with. I'll be sending you a Zoom invitation. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks for getting this together, Julianne. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I wish there were easier answers.
Me too.